On April 6, 2022, the United States Senate passed an act which may very well be one of the most significant laws passed in its halls during the 21st century. Its title is the Ukraine Democracy Defense Lend-Lease Act of 2022. Its purpose being to, quote, loan and lease defense articles to the government of Ukraine and eastern flank countries, end quote, in order to protect those nations from aggression by the Russian Federation. This last part is actually politically and diplomatically quite significant and inflammatory, as not even during the Second World War was the original Lend-Lease Act isolating the people causing it, that being Nazi Germany and Japan. In this case, they have directly challenged and singled out Russia as the aggressor and the reason they are instituting it. Therefore, the Russian Federation has construed this, or most likely will construe this, as an act of war, at least in a political sense. The Russian Foreign Ministry, like always, has rattled their saber, saying that Western aid to Ukraine is reaching a level which they consider direct involvement. But given the horrific damage suffered by Russian forces in Ukraine thus far, a direct confrontation without nuclear arms has been proven to be practically suicidal. The US, NATO, and its allies in the Pacific, namely Japan and Australia, have the capability to defeat the Russian military in open battle relatively quickly, unless they use weapons of mass destruction. NATO bases in the Baltic and Poland are now teeming with US and British troops, who have since started referring to their posting there as the pre-game lobby. Thus, direct involvement by NATO, or a full escalation by Russia, is practically impossible, or rather unthinkable, as doing so would literally end everything. Unless Putin goes off the deep end, which of course, despite all that has transpired, I don't think is likely. He may be maniacal, but I don't think he's actually that crazy. But some people who may not be as well versed in history are probably asking, what is Lend-Lease? What even is this term? Lend-Lease, or to use its official name, an act to promote the defense of the United States, was an act signed into law on March 11th, 1941, which allowed the government and its executive branch, then at the time being Franklin Delano Roosevelt, President of the United States, to provide defense articles to other countries. As the bill reads, they will provide defense articles to countries whose defense is vital to the security of the United States. Defense articles were defined in this bill as anything that is used in the area or process of defense for the purposes of defense. This wording is deliberately chosen to allow for the United States to provide any and all necessary military assistance to a nation currently engaged in a conflict whose victory would serve the continued security of the United States without the US directly getting involved themselves. This bill was a watershed moment of the Second World War. In fact, as far as the Allies were concerned, it was this bill that won the war more than any of the battles. With this, until the formal entry of the United States in December 1941, where that bill was then folded into a broader American logistics effort, the Allied war machine was able to guarantee that wherever it fought against whatever enemy, their men would be armed, equipped, clothed, and fed with literal megatons of supplies to spare. Just to give you an idea, here is a graph of US aircraft production, or a table of US aircraft production, over the course of World War II compared to the other nations. And this ratio is reflected in practically every form of war material, to tanks, to bombs, to trucks, to ships, artillery, rifles, all the way down to GI socks. If the Allies needed gear, it would be provided with stock to spare by the American industrial powerhouse that was the time. Honestly, it would be no exaggeration to say that despite all the excellent weapon systems like the P-51, the Sherman, or the M1 Garand rifle, the General Motors truck was the most lethal Allied weapon of World War II. After all, the saying goes, bullets don't fly without supply. And it's this last part, more than anything, that makes this bill so important, as it guarantees something that the Ukrainians would have been more concerned about than any other issue: logistical security. The fact of the matter is, the Russian military, though it has failed in its initial attack, is backed by the natural resources and reserve war stocks of Russia and all the muscle that brings. The Russian invasion force is currently regrouping, calling up more conscripts, reorganizing their battalion tactical groups, and pursuing traditional full-scale war in the eastern half of Ukraine. The simple fact of the matter is, the same advantages that aided the Ukrainians in their defense of Kiev now work against them. Moving their troops, their supplies, ammunition, food, all the while evacuating refugees and the wounded, takes an immense amount of logistical capacity, something which, when the Russians have a substantial air and artillery presence in the region, makes life very difficult. The Russians are now inside or near their borders and hence in range of their own communications and logistics hubs, allowing them to resolve a lot of their earlier issues. It's not all bad news though for the Ukrainians. We've seen in recent days that the Ukrainians are making a move on Kherson, and given the destruction of the landing ships in Berdyansk, they've been able to call on units which are no longer needed to defend against an amphibious invasion around Odessa. This gives them a good chance at retaking Kherson, which would be a huge blow against the Russians in the south. But for Ukraine, the Donbass is a far more problematic situation. Moving all the heavy-duty gear from the Kiev and Sumy area of operations down into the Donbass will be a difficult and dangerous process. And while we have reason to be confident in their professionalism and capability, the Russians have a new commander with recent combat experience in Syria and a new, more traditional Soviet-style battle plan. And though Ukrainian resistance has been ferocious, the Russians are making gains in the region and are gearing up for round 2 with a vengeance. Satellite intel has confirmed large numbers of Russian units moving into the Donbass AO, and they have stepped up air sorties and missile strikes, to the extent that older cruise missile systems and artillery pieces have been returned to service from the reserves, such as the Tochka-U missile system. And most importantly of all, spring and summer are coming with a vengeance. We have now shifted from a short but brutal war leading to a protracted insurgency to an actual full-scale ongoing conflict with two sides engaged in a traditional near peer-to-peer fight. And like in World War II before it, Lend-Lease is most likely going to play the pivotal role in whether or not Ukraine can win. So what will Lend-Lease entail? Prior to this point, the World War II parallels are just as present. Up until now, the United States has been providing aid to Ukraine as part of foreign aid and defense packages authorized by Congress. This has been done in partnership with NATO nations, US allies such as Australia. We've currently just sent Bushmaster MRAPs to Ukraine, and the EU with its NLAW shipments, among other things. But like with the Neutrality in Arms Export Acts in the 1930s, there have been roadblocks in the provision of aid to Ukraine due to the various laws, restrictions, costs, and bureaucratic red tape. Prior to their involvement in World War II, the United States maintained its neutrality by stating that it would only export arms or provide foreign aid if the nations receiving it would pay for its transport and the goods, known as cash and carry. This, of course, was designed so that only France, the UK, and their colonial possessions, as well as countries like Australia and New Zealand, etc., could import arms, as the Royal Navy would just sink German ships if they tried. But it still presented major financial and logistical problems. While Ukraine hasn't had to deal with that side, the bureaucracy and budget approvals, delays in shipments, and the geopolitical legal minefield have caused issues. The failed MiG-29 transfer between Poland and Ukraine being one of the most publicly known examples. With this new act, the United States executive branch can now authorize, initiate, and ensure the delivery of any defense article the Ukrainians ask for, subject to approval of the president. However, I imagine he probably wouldn't appreciate being called Uncle Joe in this World War II metaphor, considering the circumstances. Anyway, what does this all mean? First of all, in regards to US equipment supplied by the US Department of Defense, if the Ukrainians ask for it and the president says yes, it's on its way. Now, given the logistics of it and the nature of security and escalation, it would most likely be safe to assume that CBRN, that being chemical, biological, radiological, or nuclear weapons, are not on the table. Nor are the top-flight US technologies such as the B-2 Spirit, AC-130, F-22 or F-35 stealth fighters, the latest model tanks or infantry fighting vehicles and all their associated technologies, etc. And given Turkey is blocking the Bosphorus Strait to warships from any country, and Ukraine's tiny navy size, I doubt we'll see any Arleigh Burke destroyers or Los Angeles-class submarines being sent their way either. Although rather against all expectations and the odds, as seems to be a habit of the Ukrainians up till now, they are, on paper at least, winning the naval war, given they have sunk 2 amphibious landing ships in Berdyansk, or at least sunk one and heavily crippled another, and have, as of the day of this recording, that being the 14th of April 2022, sunk the Russian cruiser Moskva. So, yeah, maybe they don't need naval reinforcements after all. But apart from the aforementioned highly classified high-tech stuff, or the flat-out ridiculous like nukes, the entire arsenal of the United States is now at the disposal of Ukraine should they request it, along with information from all of the US intelligence assets they have available, such as satellites, signal intelligence, and AWACS. But this comes with its own host of challenges. As cool as it would be to have Ukrainians regain air superiority with a fleet of F-16s, followed by the raining of death and destruction on Russian columns with A-10s and Apache gunships, it takes at least a year's training for a pilot or mechanic who already has foundational knowledge of advanced jets to become proficient in its maintenance and operation. It then takes even longer for the confidence and experience in these systems to take root. And the same goes for all advanced weapon systems. It takes a full training and integration course for not just the operators of the systems, but for the entire logistics and support network as well, not to mention the command and control elements to know how to implement the system in their current order of battle, and how to employ it effectively as part of their doctrine. To give a quick set of hypotheticals, just to get my point across, take the M1 Abrams main battle tank. Arguably the best tank in the world at this time, it has the most contemporary combat experience. It has an excellent performance record. It has demonstrated ability to resist munitions that we have seen contemporary Russian tanks not survive. It has excellent firepower and cross-country speed. The fighting compartment is relatively roomy and comfortable, much more so than Soviet designs at any rate. It seems like the ideal choice for the Ukrainians to get a tank division together and go kill Russians with. However, you have everything that comes with an M1 to consider. Unlike Soviet designs, it requires a crew of 4 instead of 3, as it doesn't have an autoloader. It needs a manual loader to operate the weapon system. That is one more man to train, equip, and feed. Manual loading is also a skill-based job. It looks simple, but it really isn't. You have to factor in that it involves learning ammunition types, physical training to repeatedly and effectively move rounds into the breach, learning how to organize rounds on the ready rack in the most efficient manner, as well as to provide the commander with an extra set of hands and eyes for all the subsidiary duties on the vehicles, all the maintenance, all of the extra stuff you need to do to keep the vehicle running. The loader needs to be trained in all that too. Then you have its maintenance and logistics cost. The M1 uses a trackpad system instead of the standard linked metal tracks on the T-Series tanks, meaning that not only do you have to change out the tracks for maintenance or if they're damaged, you also have to change the track pads. And there are a whole lot of those. It's a time-consuming process. Then there's all the gear on the Abrams. It's made in the USA and requires a lot of spare parts to keep running. It has advanced electronics and systems, thermal sights, a crow's remote gun system, all of the accoutrements to go with it, all of which need trained maintainers to fix should they break or suffer battle damage. And the biggest thing of all, the engine. The Abrams is a turbine. It's a jet engine on an armored vehicle. It guzzles fuel and wears out quickly unless it is properly maintained and correctly operated by the crew. Again, you need a lot of spares and a lot of gas to keep it operating correctly. And as I keep emphasizing, people trained to do all of this and all of the support jobs with it. Not to mention the pain in the arse to translate all of the training materials, all the labels inside the tank, and all of the readouts on the systems, such as the guns, etc., into Ukrainian, as it's all in English and Latin characters instead of in Ukrainian and Cyrillic. At least the aviation department doesn't have so much of a problem there, as to fly in controlled airspace, you need to have a decent command of English. The only downside here is, as mentioned before, all of the logistical factors I just mentioned for the M1 Abrams are doubly problematic for aircraft. Weapon systems, the weapons to go with them, the engine, the avionics, the airframe itself, all of these and the logistical supply chain to go with it, not to mention the infrastructure to support it. Honestly, I don't envy the logistics guys in either the US or Ukrainian militaries. As great as all the new toys they're eventually going to get will be, I doubt any of them are going to get any sleep for a long-ass while. So, if all this is an issue, why is Lend-Lease such a good thing? Well, it circles back to the original point of logistical security. For the sake of brevity and clarity, I will say that the Lend-Lease program will most likely proceed in two distinct phases with an ongoing and consistent flow of defense articles of the essential and practical kind. So let's start with that last bit. Essential and practical defense articles. With the entry of the United States as a lend-leasing power, Ukraine theoretically no longer has to worry about logistical support beyond the ability and volume that can be shipped through Europe and into the country itself. The United States Air Force has a very capable lift capacity, as in airlift capacity. In fact, just to give you an idea, the US Air Force's airlift capacity can move the entire Australian Army and Air Force in one go. They can lift our entire military capability in one trip, bar the Navy. That's how much airlift capacity they have. As such, critical requests in bulk can arrive very quickly should it be necessary, while large-scale movements of equipment can be achieved by sailing container ships through the Baltic and delivering them straight into Gdynia in Poland, whereupon a convoy of trucks can get it the rest of the way. The biggest impact of this arrangement is not so much the tanks, aircraft, and guns. It's everything that they can provide to keep Ukraine running. The United States has huge reserve stocks of night vision and thermal equipment, Picatinny weapon rails, ACOG rifle scopes and PEC-15 lasers to go on those rails, body armor with level 4 ballistic plates that can stop rounds and fragmentation up to the larger rifle calibers. They have trucks, mine-resistant vehicles, Humvees for general movement, small arms from pistols to machine guns to 40mm grenade launchers, and all the ammunition for them they'd ever need. Seaburn equipment, such as Geiger counters, gas masks with filters, as well as the infamous mop gear. And the most important asset of all, MREs, meals ready to eat, by the millions. An army marches on its stomach, and the Americans can feed the Ukrainian military pretty much indefinitely. The US has warehouses upon warehouses of assorted equipment to cover any logistical contingency, and that's on top of an increased shipment of even more javelins and stingers that they've already been receiving. At the very least, the United States entering the war under Lend-Lease in an official capacity has done something astronomical. Ukraine now has the backing to ensure they don't lose. As long as the supplies keep coming, they can keep the Russians from making significant gains while exacting a horrific toll. And due to the sanctions, the losses sustained, as well as a myriad of other factors covered in my other videos and by technical subject matter experts, the longer the war goes on, the worse it gets for Russia. But Zelensky has made it clear he doesn't just want to not lose, which some may say is winning in itself given the circumstances. He wants to win. And he defines it as reclaiming all of Ukraine's internationally recognized territory, which includes Crimea and the Donbass, etc. And despite their incredible performance thus far, to launch an offensive against a fully reorganized Russian army right at the edge of their territory, while being as far away from your main supply source as you can physically be, it's going to be impossible, unless you have the forces to do it. You're going to need aircraft, artillery, tanks, MLRS, and the men trained in their use, which is where the two-phase rollout comes in. The first phase is the initiation of the aforementioned logistical effort, which will continue as long as hostilities continue, and most likely well after during the rebuilding phase, assuming Putin doesn't come to his senses and give this up, or they decide to mobilize their reserves completely and initiate a total war, sending 3 million men into Ukraine to purchase victory via Ura charge, while leveling the entire country with indiscriminate artillery barrages. The recent breakdown in peace talks, however, suggests he may take this course, though even then I'm skeptical as NATO can't help but react if such a course of action takes place. The next part of the first phase is the backfilling of NATO countries with modern Western equipment by the United States, who, if you remember the wording of the document, are covered by this Lend-Lease bill as well, meaning they can ship equipment and personnel to former Warsaw Pact states such as Poland, Romania, Slovakia, and Hungary, who in return will give the Ukrainians all of their old Soviet gear. This gets around the biggest problem mentioned before. The Ukrainians already know how to use all of this equipment, and they have the logistics network in place to maintain it. S-300 long-range SAMs from the former Pact countries have already been sent to Ukraine, while the Czech Republic has committed its reserves of T-72s and BMPs to the effort, the first shipments of which have already arrived. Likewise, Poland has committed to send theirs, And now the US has the ability to unilaterally cover their deficiencies in full, other countries will surely follow. This effort will be able to tide them over, paving the way for Phase 2. Phase 2 will take place over the next 6 months to a year, where Ukrainian personnel will start to be trained on NATO systems that they requested. The M1 Abrams, Predator and Reaper drones, the F-16, and countless other weapon systems. This will take a long time to get going, but when it finally does get going, the Ukrainians will have the ability to meet the Russians on even terms. Tie that in with training, logistics, and intelligence support, and they are definitely in a good position to go on the offensive. As for maintaining the level of supply and not just handing them old gear but giving them new stuff, US defense companies are still geared up from the war on terror and eager for a new market. They will be more than happy to provide them arms as long as Uncle Sam will pay for them. And we all know just how much the US loves to pad its defense budget. Throw that in with the EU and other NATO countries who likewise need arms, while also having their own defense industries vying for a piece of the pie, the biggest being Saab and BAE, who make the famous NLAW disposable AT launcher that has done so much damage, while Fabrique Nationale, H&K, and the myriad of European small arms manufacturers Glock, Steyr, etc., I'm sure they'll all get their share too. Though it may be in a good cause, in this case, as it was during World War II, it is a sad, undeniable fact that war is very, very good for business. Say what you will, for all of capitalism's many faults when it comes to wars, nothing works better. And the incredible might of the US military industry really does come in clutch where it counts. In any case, it's a game of time now. Ukraine just needs to stay in the fight and get the ball rolling. With public support high, and only getting higher, and with Western aid well on the way, Putin is now on the clock. The defeat at Kiev has cost him politically, while Russian losses have been devastating. But he still has a chance of achieving some of his strategic and political aims if he can win serious victories in eastern Ukraine. The spring rains and the mud season are in full effect right now. Mechanized warfare is at a standstill. The Russians are confined to the roads. Once summer begins, though, we shall see a new and bloodier chapter in this war. While I am pro-Ukraine and biased towards their cause, I won't deny that, not that it should be hard to spot that, I will not sugarcoat the military situation. They've won a stunning victory in round 1, defending their capital, inflicting horrific losses on the Russian advance. But 20% of that was superior training and experience. Another 20% was the motivation of defending their home, along with all the benefits of the home ground advantage. And another 20% was NATO support. The other 40% is really, if we're being honest, down to sheer Russian incompetence, their underestimation of the Ukrainians, and the cataclysmic lack of logistical support or coherent tactical and strategic planning. The Russians attacked in the worst time of year, with a quarter of the troops needed, and have broken every one of their fundamental doctrinal principles. Their comms are a mess, and the logistics non-existent. They still don't have air superiority. It's a shambles. But now they are in the east. They are close to the Donbass and core Russian territories. They have a new commander, new reserves, and are taking their time building up, reconstituting their BTGs, and fixing the aforementioned issues. Air activity has increased, and they are within range of their logistics and comm networks based in Russia. This coming battle will be rough for Ukraine, and the odds are really stacked against them. But with a lot of help, and a little bit of luck, Zelensky himself says he only needs half the luck people wish him. Given that, they're in with a chance. Slava Ukraine. See you next time.